Welcome to episode 82 of our Road to Unicum. By popular request, we're going to take a look at Frontlines, episode 1 of the 2019 calendar year just wrapped up, and I'm going to feature footage of 2 Frontline battles. This was my very first Frontline battle, and you'll notice as you watch me play that I'm pretty unfamiliar with the mechanics. This video also will give me a chance to talk about the new M41D, the new Chinese Tier 8 premium light tank that was released and which I was given for free as a community contributor. So with Frontlines, there are basically 3 vertical or north-south lanes. There's the A zone that leads to the D zone, the B zone that leads to the E zone, and the C zone that leads to the F zone. And if you're wondering why I just knocked over that tree, that's the garden. I'm knocking over trees because tree trunks don't provide any kind of meaningful camouflage, but knocked down trees behave in many ways like bushes, and it's one thing you've seen me talk about, across a lot of the videos when I'm talking about camouflage and vision. So just like with the normal mode, there are cap points on the map. There's some notable differences in Frontlines. If you shoot an opponent who is trying to who's in the cap trying to accumulate points, you won't reduce their points, but you will block them from accumulating points for a period of time, 5 seconds by default. And the only way to remove cap points from the cappers is to actually kill them. Okay, now in this particular case with the A cap, I don't actually know the map too well, and it's pretty exposed. There are basically in this A zone 2 exposed ridge lines. There's the ridge line that's on the far west, where it's just by the Progetto that I'm aiming at, and then there's the ridge line on the far east, where their LT-432 and Progetto 46 are. The nice thing about the ridge that's in front of me, this is an east-west ridge. This allows me to kind of drop down behind in terms of cover, and I'm also trying to stay a little bit behind these bushes here. Now, the way that this mode also works is every battle, everyone starts off as a private, and then as you accumulate experience, you can rank up all the way up to general. Getting to general, some people will say it's not that hard. Meanwhile, there are a lot of people trying to get it. You'll see me in this very first Frontlines battle get within a hair of earning general. I wasn't aware of it at the time. If I had known that, I would have been maybe a little bit more frustrated, a little bit more aggressive. And there's some fine driving into a building there. At some point, like if the opponent's is a light tank, what you wanted to try to do obviously is spot as much as possible. The assisted damage certainly helps with getting you to rank up towards general. And obviously you want to weaken their tanks as much as possible. That'll make it easy for your team to cap. I don't want to push into the cap yet. It feels like it's too early. Potentially after this defender goes down, I could think about it, but the defender kills our Pershing who's sitting in the cap, and then you notice our IS-3A also dies. I should rephrase what I said. Given that those 2 tanks died, going into the cap as a big, large, squishy light tank would have been an exercise in futility. So my not going over was the right call. And then in this case, the Progetto 46 is going to YOLO me, and thankfully he misses a shot. I'm going to get heavy damage here. I get hit by Artie for 449 damage. The thing I know about the Progetto is he's already blown his clip, so he can sit here and try to ram me, but most likely I'll be able to reload faster than he can get that first shell reloaded in his clip. Okay, I get a little lucky there. That Progetto that's sitting up on the east ridge misses, and one of the big features about Frontlines is, one, you have respawns in case you die, so it's not like the regular random battles mode where once you die, you're done for the battle. So there are these respawn zones, and you'll see not only do my hit points and ammunition get restored, but my consumables. So the kits also get renewed, which is great. Once you've used the given repair zone, you can't use it again for a period of time. It looks like by default it's around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And so I'm going to go ahead and move forward now. Now once you've capped a zone, we haven't done it yet, but once a team caps the zone, the defenders have to leave within a period of time. I think it's about 45 seconds to a minute. And if they don't, they will get hit by, they'll be bombarded with airstrikes and most likely resulting in their death. So there's kind of this interesting thing where the defenders typically want to defend as long as they viably can, but the second it looks like they're going to lose the zone, the cap, and they can't protect against it, they should really start thinking about retreating. And so what will often happen is teams that are contesting or in the zone but not defending effectively will lose the zone, and then if they're too close towards the cap, they'll get farmed as they're trying to retreat. Now you could certainly argue in this situation I should have backed up and then gone back and sat in the cap, both to speed it up as well as to earn some points toward ranking up. In this case, I think it's fine as long as you're active doing something, whether it's capping or decapping or applying damage on their tanks. I think that's fine as long as you're meaningfully contributing, because I was able to basically get that Scorpion burn down the vast majority of his hit points. And then there you see I took damage. That is from a special ability that comes from combat reserves. So combat reserves are either active or passive abilities that you can purchase using currency that is earned through the Frontlines mode for things like passive buffs as far as capping or extending the block period if you damage or hit the module of an opponent who's trying to cap. And then there are other things you can get like airstrikes and artillery, etc. And an on-use AoE buff. Now, I'll tell you frankly, I don't like the personal reserves. I think it adds another layer of complexity. If the mode itself is good and the maps are designed well, you don't need to add any gimmicks. And to me, the personal reserves feel like a gimmick. And it's yet another thing that adds to, let's say, differentials between players. So people who do the Frontlines mode early and rank up, people who earn a lot of the currency from participating in Frontlines will now have an advantage around people who are more casual or miss the first part of a given episode. I'm imagining that every episode of Frontlines, and they each run for about a week, everyone starts from scratch. So I'm not really a fan of the personal reserves. I know maybe some people think it's cool. In my opinion, if they wanted to do it better, what Wargaming could have done is made personal reserves available for everybody, so it's a level playing field, and it just becomes an option then of which personal reserves you select and when you choose to use them. Now, I'm being really careful here. Obviously, I don't know how much of the exposure is around this map. I'm not familiar with it, basically. Obviously, with heavy tanks, whenever you can get flanking fire on them, you want to, especially since in cases where they're somewhat angled towards you or facing towards you, especially if they've got a strong armor layout, you're not going to be able to reliably damage them. Like you can see right now, I don't really have a shot, so it's time for me to go ahead and move on. But like I was saying, if the personal reserves were made available to everyone, and then it's just a matter of just selecting which ones you want to use, just like with consumables. Anyone can select any consumable. There's no requirement to unlock them or to earn them or whatever. And some folks may think that my suggestion of making them available to everyone is boring, or it's less appealing to them because they want to grind them. But when you look at the way that most games have been designed in the last 5 years, what tends to be popular and works is creating a level playing field, and then it's a matter of the player making choices about what things they want to equip, what hero they want to play, what tank they want to play, and what consumables or skills that they're going to use, versus having to unlock or earn those things first and then select them. Now, I understand, some of you may feel like, well, crew skills are something which you kind of have to grind up and earn, but in my opinion, that makes some sense from a progression standpoint, right? But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. I think if a game mode is good enough on its own, you don't need to add beyond it, right? Like there's random battles, and then there's encounter mode, and there's assault mode, and the tanks themselves don't change at all their capabilities. The maps change in terms of how you play them, the strategies you would use to win them. Now, there is a significant design flaw in terms of the map. The C zone, which is the far eastern zone, is just ridiculously difficult to cap. I'll actually show this later because I had heard about this on a thread on Reddit before I'd actually ever tried to play the C zone. And then the last battle of episode 1, I think I played like 6 or 7 battles, happened to be one where I started off in zone C. So I tried as a heavy to see what it'd be like to try to cap, and it was a most unpleasant and frankly unfair experience. Okay, in this particular case, this FE4202 is in a pretty bad position. The nice thing, our AMX is pressuring him, right? So I'm watching that FE's turret really carefully, and he's not looking at me. When I know he's otherwise preoccupied, I can come up and keep damaging and chain tracking him. It's a really good position for me to be in because he can't meaningfully hide his exposure from me because he's distant from that ledge that separates us, whereas I'm close. And that's always a rule. Whoever is closest to the hardcover or closest to the ridge can dictate when you and the other tanks see each other. In this particular case, I decided to go ahead and pull up into the cap point because we couldn't really see them. We've pushed them far enough back. It doesn't seem like they have any tanks nearby, and that should generally be the rule. If you can get in far enough to cap and they aren't on your flanks, right, you should push into the cap and help cap it quickly. The exception to this is if you're playing one of the flanks, either the far eastern or western side of the map, and you're trying to kind of back them off and drive them back, or you're putting flanking fire on their tanks that are driving as fast as they can back to the cap to try to block the cap progress or kill some of the cappers. But as long as you're doing something, that's fine. And you'll notice for a long time I wasn't firing on that T-54 Mod 1. I probably could have been doing it because I had, close to 600 hit points. I'm clearly going to survive one shell from him. The only thing I need to be a little bit worried about that, I think that's the second time that the M40 has targeted me. And so, you don't want to play it too cute, because if I go out and try to brawl a little bit, lose too much hit points, and then die, we lose those cap points. So you can see I gained over a full rank going up from lieutenant all the way up into captain from capping the zone. And if I have the personal reserve engineering, that actually speeds up the rate at which the capping happens, which is, as I think just at first blush, probably looks like the most practical personal reserve to use. And then this is an important thing. Whenever you cap a zone, you should generally push up as aggressively as possible, because you will find opportunities. They're not so overexposed now, but there are times when the opponents were really closely contesting the cap, and then they've just got to turn around, drop their pants, and run, because they're going to get shellacked by AI aerial bombardment if they don't. And the nice thing about this is that the T-25 Pilot 1 is in a pretty exposed position. I'm getting easy flanking shots from him. That's my third shot put into him, and then he gets dropped. Now you get you get experience as far as your rank. Like, I'm captain from capping and decapping and blocking, as well as from damage, direct damage, assisted damage, and kills. Right, so things that meaningfully progress your team along the zones in the map, as well as defeating any tanks that you see, both meaningfully matter. And whenever possible, you want to go ahead and drop by a resupply cache to get your tank brought back to as good as new. Now, I think some people have said that in some cases, if you're far enough away from a resupply point, dying is better. In general, I don't play with that philosophy. It may be true in some practical cases. Generally speaking, I try to stay alive as long as possible and to deal as much harm to my opponents as possible. You'll see at a point later where I get heavily damaged in this match, and I go a long way back to the resupply point, and something very unfortunate happens. But we'll talk about this. So I'm trying to back off these tanks. This ridge point here is kind of like a flex point between the D zone and the E zone, where that projectile 46 is. And so, getting them off, if they're on that hill, they can provide fire either to the southwest or to the southeast. So it's kind of like a pivot point. It's good to generally brush opponents off from such positions because they have a very advantageous field of fire, and so we want to back them off. The other thing you're noticing that what I'm not doing here is I'm not driving north, right? So what I'm doing is I'm going to skirt around these buildings and then move laterally east to west. And part of the reason I'm doing this is I'm just trying to spot their tanks that are directly to the north, right? If I had pushed directly to the north toward where their T-54 Mod 1 is, I'll be overextended, and I won't be able to get meaningful help unless those tanks that are on the hill are M4190, and we have looks like a T28, is that a T28 Prot on the hill to the southeast of me. You don't want to push too far in a vertical direction solo, and that would apply whether you're on attack or defense. Especially if you're on attack, what you want to do is to kind of ideally across the three vertical lanes, push up across the zones as evenly as possible. And part of the reason why is that if the more zones that you capture on a given horizontal east-west level, it reduces the cap points needed for the next horizontal row. In that case, those would be the D, E, and F zones. At this point, I'll be honest, like I didn't read any of the instructions about Frontline. I had a general idea of how it worked. I actually thought that both teams would fight and try to push each other back and forth, but the way Frontlines actually works is that there is one team that's on essentially attack, offense, and the other one's on defense. All right, so I'm reasonably far ahead of my tanks. I just need to get some spots so that we know what their deployment is, we know their snipers are. Hopefully our guys can work in some damage. And so, from that perspective, playing a light tank, it doesn't change from that perspective. Your eyes are still one of your most important assets as a light tank. And then we can see an overmatch here. We've got a bunch of tanks pushing along this line here, so we're going to be able to get up towards this SU-130 and this FV. I do take quite a bit of damage there from the SU-130, but I should move up as quickly as possible, and I've already switched to high explosive. You saw me doing this earlier during the Scorpion. I probably could have switched to high explosive like 1 or 2 shots earlier. It all depends on the amount of exposure. If you know that a big squishy tank like the SU-130 PM or the Scorpion's going to be exposed for a meaningful length of time, you should go ahead and load as much high explosive as possible. Now, you can see in the middle of the map here, there's a little icon marked as 1. There are 5 pillboxes along the top horizontal row, and each pillbox has 3,200 hit points, and the goal is to destroy 3 of them, right? So, and they have impenetrable front armor from the front, but they are penetratable from the side and especially from the rear. So the unfortunate thing for me is, I'm clearly one-shottable. The FE4202 is in a good position by that rock, so he can minimize his exposure. But obviously, if he puts 1 shell into me, I am a goner. So this is one of these awkward situations where I'm really not near a resupply point. It's quite far away. And what I'm going to try here in a moment is see if I can provide some sniping or maybe be far enough kind of toward the outer part of that 445 meter view range. It turns out he still spotted me. So if I'm going to shoot at him from this distance, he will see me before I fire. I might be able to peek out and shoot at him while he's preoccupied or looking elsewhere. But overall, I feel like I can't really do much until I go and get more hit points. Like, this is the extent of the kind of shots I'm going to be able to get on that FE4202. And you have to recognize when an opponent is in a superior position, and just trying to force it isn't going to make sense. Now, obviously, if there were multiple friendly tanks, like when we pushed up on that SU-130 PM, maybe I could go with them. But fundamentally, my combat options are going to be pretty limited while I'm running around with such a low hit point pool. And it takes me a while to kind of make the decision, because there isn't a resupply point here. I'm going to drive all the way back down into the D zone, the northeastern corner, where that resupply point is. Often, I think the resupply points, I'm not sure whether the resupply cooldown is at the tank level or if it's at the particular resupply point level. Meaning, if I use a resupply point and the cooldown is triggered, does that apply for any resupply point for the same tank? Or is it just for that resupply point? If I drive into another zone, can I go over to another resupply point? If one of you knows the answer, please feel free to post it. I don't know. But, like I was telling you guys earlier, there's a point in this video where I drive pretty far back to get into the resupply point, and then something terribly unfortunate happens. There, LT-432 is heading toward the resupply point, and he is going to get restored to full health while I'm sitting here still running around with 1 shottable. And if you are, I didn't realize this either. I had assumed that the different teams would have their own resupply points. Like in war, that would actually make sense, right? But as it turns out, the resupply points are shared by both teams. And so this is important because you can end up in a situation like this where you weren't expecting to see an enemy, near the resupply point, especially if your team is pushed far beyond that. The other thing to note is, if you're in the resupply point and you get damaged while you are trying to resupply, it will stop the channeling ability that's pushing up your HP and helping you regain your ammo and your consumables. So that's something else important to consider. If you know the second you step foot into the resupply point, it may not make sense to do it unless you're at a sliver of health and you really need it. So obviously there's a cooldown now. My M41D, I can't play it anymore. That tank, by the way, it has great gun depression. It feels very much like, in terms of the profile, like an M41 Bulldog or like the German M41 90mm tank. The big difference is, in this case, the M41D, the Chinese light premium, has 192 silver penetration and 170 alpha. Definitely the alpha is a little bit on the lower side, but that's true for a lot of the tier 8 light tanks. Some of them have alpha of 240, which is really nice, but the M41D is not one of them. But the gun handling, the 10 degrees of gun depression, and then the 192 silver penetration makes the gun pretty functional. Nice thing, obviously, playing Progetto. People have joked that Frontline mode really is World of Progetto, and it's a fine tank to play here because having those 3 shells and being able to selectively either fire 1 shot at a time or unload a bunch of shots for burst damage is really powerful. So the guns, like I said, it looks like we've already taken out, or I think we've heavily damaged the Bunker 1. Bunker 2 hasn't been damaged yet. That's directly to the north of me. You can see that there are several enemy tanks between us and that point, so that might be a little bit difficult getting over to. Some people, I'm not sure whether you get points for damaging the pillboxes. I would assume so. What I'm trying to do is just try to stay relevant. Now I'm looking to see if I can help clear out that Progetto or get shots on another tank. Obviously, because you win or lose on whether or not you can destroy 3 of those 5 pillboxes. You want to prioritize or do things in service of supporting that, whether you actually go and you shoot the pillboxes yourself, or you help support pushes and eliminate enemy tanks so that your team has a clear path to do so. Part of what makes this kind of fun and interesting is you can do area denial by selecting certain sniping positions. That can be really powerful. And in this case, you can see I can tell the Type 59 is chasing the HWK-12, which he should, because he's the much kind of brawler-oriented tank. So I'm trying to get over here as quickly as possible. I think this M41 Bulldog sees the exact same thing that I do, and that once we take out that Type 59, there aren't any enemy tanks nearby. They're pillbox 2. The only danger you have to be aware of here is that over by pillbox 3, which is to the east-southeast, they can fire down on you. Here you can get some sweet tracking shots on that Type 59. It's so nice with guns that are reasonably accurate to be able to track tanks, especially if you've got a high rate of fire, or like the Progetto, you can behave like a reloader, an autoloader, and push the shells through. So again, this is part of my ignorance. I didn't realize. Had I realized, all I need to do now is just shoot that thing to my right, I would have done so, but partly due to my ignorance of the mode, I went over here to try to fight this Tiger, whereas just getting some shots on that pillbox would have been the smarter play. And obviously where I am here, the problem with being here is that they have tanks who might be able to shoot me. Okay, actually, you know what? They can't shoot me from the 3 pillbox that's kind of like in that castle, because this rock and hill is here. Now there is a Batchat 12T just around the corner here. Now he could have potentially clipped me out, but his first shot missed, and at that point I know he can't kill me. And so, I want to make sure to get those 3 shots, carefully aimed in. Their projectile doesn't have a shot. So I could potentially move in, and actually what I probably should have done is wait and let 2 shells reload and then clip out that 12T. Well, what's crazy is I didn't realize that after Major is the general rank, and I wasn't paying attention, because if I had literally to get to general rank, what I would have needed is probably only 1 or 2 more damaging shots would have probably done it. And so instead of kind of futzing around here and driving and being worried about that 12T, I would have just turned around and started firing on this T-32. But I missed Major by a really small sliver, which was kind of sad. But again, this was my frontline battle, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So I was mostly just trying to be helpful in terms of combat, pushing and flanking and supporting our pushes that way. Okay, so if you're wondering about what are some of the main issues in Frontline and some of the main tactics, we'll look at that with some footage from a second Frontline battle. And what's really cool here, they got top experience, tied for top kills, top damage, the works. Okay, so I heard how rough trying to be on attack on the C lane was, and since I spawned here, I was really excited to come check it out for myself. And the problem is simply this, that Eastern Ridge is a fantastic sniper shelf, and if you are facing toward the north, then you're giving up your side to the tanks to the east. Like I just got shot by that Wizzy 132 who's shooting me from the east, from my right. And if you're facing to the east to shoot their snipers, then they're tanks that are just on the northwest and northeast and north sides of the cap can shoot at you. And in my case, I said, okay, fine, I'm not going to try pushing in towards the southwest corner of the cap. I'm going to go around and try to approach it from the northwest. And this doesn't work either for the same reason, because those obnoxious snipers that are sitting back here on the far eastern side of the map still have shots on me. And while this ground would be great for me if there weren't a sniper shelf, because I could drive up slowly even without my good gun depression and stay, keep that lower plate, that lower glacis weak spot hidden. But if you look at this, there's just a ridiculous amount of exposure that I have, and to get out of here, I'm going to be getting shot at by multiple tanks, which is just brutal. It was funny. I had fired on this Wizzy like 4 times and missed, so it's finally nice to put him down. And then I decided I'm not going to beat my head against the wall. I already tried the C cap point. It's terrible from the side. And so I move over to the B cap point. And what was really nice is, if your team is starting to put meaningful pressure capping on the cap, their team will the tanks will YOLO rush it in a desperate attempt to try to get some, blocking or, killing of the cappers. But in this case, you can see, this is what I was talking about before. The second the zone is capped, those guys have got to run. And, that often means that they're going to be highly vulnerable to be getting shot in the rear. Now, in a case like this, you want to make sure to push up and keep on the front of the battle as much as possible. And then I select to fire on the Progetto 46 instead of the Defender for two simple reasons. One, the Progetto is squishy. Two, he's faster, and so we got to get damage on him while we can. And three, that Defender's armor is only good while he's pointing toward us. The fastest thing for him to do to exit would be to turn around and drive away, but if he does that, he's going to be basically, giving up his sides and especially his rear, which would make it easier for us to kill him. So I knew that we should work damage on the Progetto. That Defender's already screwed anyway. He should have either been further south and contesting the cap point, or he should have run away earlier. Instead, he kind of did neither, was sitting out in the open, got caught for it. The other really important thing to do, especially when you're on attack like this, is if you guys have a breakthrough or a wave rolling, push and stay to the front, get damage on their tanks as they're running, push into the cap, and like in this case, try to get as many as many tracking shots as possible. I mean, that's true in any mode, right? But if you track tanks, you limit their mobility, they can't go anywhere, and those assisted damage points that you rack up will help you rank up. So I'm now in the lower part of Captain. Our team, our collective team of 30 of us, were awful. Like, we just really struggled to do anything in a meaningful time frame on this map, and we never even ended up capping any part of that eastern front. So we didn't cap C and we didn't cap F. But watch my rank bar on the Captain. So it's going to move, it looks like about 3/4 of a bar. And you can tell also to the right of my auto fire extinguisher, I have the tier 5 buff for engineering, so I'm going to cap and block capping very efficiently. Now, I'm making a mistake here. I've actually never driven into this castle area. In hindsight, seeing my mistakes are really easy, but a couple things that we shouldn't do. One, our T-32 and Wizzy 132 should not be on the eastern side of the map because they're not going to get help from anybody. We never captured C and F, so it's going to be super easy for their team to contest that. The other problem that we've got here is I've now pushed far enough into the city that even though I'm going to get the first shot advantage on that British heavy, I'm now in too deep and exposed to two different fields of fire. So the Glenarvan's going to fire at me, this Chrysler's going to fire at me. What I should have done is just drive straight to the northwest and head toward that 3 pillbox, kill the charioteer since he doesn't have any meaningful armor, and then hopefully, help take out that pillbox. But as it turns out, a lack of familiarity with the map and also just terrible decision making as far as how to take an approach line toward the pillbox is what got me killed here. And the problem is we let, for the most part, this charioteer, be able to farm us. It looks like someone burned one of their personal reserves to heavily damage him. It's really important, assisted damage. You see, I just got 72 points of assisted damage on that enemy M41 90, and that got me over the hump into general right before the battle ended. And as it turns out, this is the last battle that I played in Frontline Episode 1, so it's kind of a relief to hit the general mark at least once out of 7 tries or something like that, even though the battle itself was enormously frustrating because of that C zone was just a bloodbath. I mean, it's almost like like the beaches of Normandy, like you saw the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. It felt like that, like we're just getting mauled out here. Anyway, I'm still working on the French light wheel vehicles. I'm still in the tier 6 grinding it, but I look forward to showing you guys that when I get through it. Take care.